Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, January 18th, and it's day 104 since October 7th. I began the day today in Beirut, Lebanon. I'm now back in Amman, Jordan. I was supposed to travel today to Erbil, but things have been escalating there and actually around the Middle East. So I have some updates in that regard. And there's a lot of things I wish that I could share, and hopefully I will be in the days ahead. I've been meeting with a small group of people traveling in Israel, in Palestine, in Jordan, in Lebanon. We've been meeting with church leaders. We've been meeting with government officials, civil society members. Our main mission is calling for peace and an end to the escalation of violence, calling for a ceasefire, an end to the bombing of Gaza, which continues. And so some updates about what's happening. Most of my international updates today come from Reuters. I got off the plane and heard that Pakistan fired retaliatory strikes at Iran. And I was like, what's that all about? And news is reporting that's stoking regional tensions. Reuters reported that Pakistan launched strikes on separatist militants inside Iran on Thursday in a retaliatory attack 2 days after Tehran said it struck the bases of another group in Pakistani territory. Honestly, I've been paying attention to the news and I didn't even hear about the Pakistani attacks. And then Iran's media said that missiles hit a village in a province that borders Pakistan and 9 people were killed, including 4 children. But both sides seemingly have signaled a desire to keep the situation contained. That's kind of one of the things we've been hearing about all of these attacks. You know, the US has had several attacks against US interests by Iranian-backed militias, and then the US has counterattacked. This has been going on since October 7th. It seems like this is a similar situation. It's the whole idea of militants and, isolated attacks here and there. This is between Pakistan and Iran. But it sounds like both sides want to keep the situation contained. And so Iran said they are committed to good neighborly relations with Pakistan, but they called on Islamabad to prevent the establishment of terrorist bases, quote unquote, on its soil. And Pakistan also issued a similar statement. The sole objective of today's act was in pursuit of Pakistan's own security and national interests, which is paramount and cannot be compromised. Hezbollah has rejected U.S. overtures, but is still, according to international news, open to diplomacy to avoid a wider war. So what's been proposed, Hezbollah has been active on the south border of Lebanon and has been having more than clashes, certainly. There have been attacks back and forth between Hezbollah and Israel on the North Israel and South Lebanon border. So Iran-backed Hezbollah rebuffed Washington's initial ideas for cooling tit-for-tat fighting with neighboring Israel. So Washington's been trying to intervene. This is, of course, the Biden administration. And so one of the things that was proposed was that Hezbollah would move their fighters back from the border. And what we heard while just being in Lebanon lately is that the concerns is that Israel will reoccupy that part of South Lebanon, which has happened historically. So Hezbollah said no to that, but they have said that they remain open to U.S. diplomacy and that they want to avoid a ruinous war. That was actually Lebanese officials that said that. The U.S. envoy Hochstein has been leading that diplomatic outreach for the United States. He has stated it's the goal to restore security at that frontier, the Israel-Lebanon border, as the, quote, wider region teeters dangerously towards a major escalation of the conflict ignited by the Gaza war. And I just would say that that's true. I mean, having been in the region for the last almost 2 weeks, it seems like all of these areas are just kind of escalating all around you. And while being in Beirut the past couple of days, I had the opportunity to meet people that have been displaced from South Lebanon. I met a priest who actually ministers there and has a church there. I learned that a lot of the community members who live in South Lebanon are actually Christian Lebanese. These are communities that have been displaced previously. They were displaced in the 2006 war. During that war, nearly 1 million Lebanese were displaced. And the numbers that we're hearing, at least having been in Lebanon, is that nearly 100,000 Lebanese on the south border have been displaced, which is the same numbers that we're hearing that are being that have been displaced in North Israel. In East Jerusalem, the hotels are full by internally displaced people that are Israelis that live on the north border, because these clashes and fighting has been so significant that it's not safe to be there. And so that's happening on both sides of the border. And I hope to talk more about that, because I have some specific stories about a Christian village on the Lebanese border. We did also hear from some NGO agencies in Lebanon that there are reports that white phosphorus is being used, which of course is against international law and has been quite destructive. And so I think a human rights agency, at least one I know, has reported having recorded white phosphorus usage on the Lebanese border. The U.S. has struck Houthi targets in Yemen again. They just said that yesterday its forces conducted strikes on 14 Houthi missiles that were loaded to be fired from Yemen. That was the fourth day that the U.S. struck targets there in less than a week. In a statement on X, the social media platform, the U.S. Central Command said Houthi missiles presented an imminent threat to merchant vessels and the U.S. Navy ships in the region. Of course, that's talking about the Red Sea. And U.S. communicated that these missiles on launch rails could have been fired at any time, prompting U.S. forces to exercise their inherent right and obligation to defend themselves. It's been announced recently that Qatar and France struck a deal to supply medicine to Israeli hostages. There still remain roughly 130 hostages held in Gaza, both Israeli and internationals. And so this deal, if implemented, would provide life-saving treatment to hostages who now have been held in Gaza for more than 100 days. I mean, today is the 104th day. It's said that about a third of the hostages have chronic illnesses that need constant medication, which includes cancer, asthma. Others are suffering from harsh captivity conditions. That's been reported by the Hostage Families Forum, an umbrella organization for the hostages and their relatives. Journalists in Gaza, one of the groups that are protected in times of war, certainly hospitals and medical professionals and humanitarian assisters, but also journalists are protected. And that's far in Gaza. It's been reported that at least 79 journalists and media workers have been killed. The Committee to Protect Journalists has reported this. Local Palestinian authorities are actually reporting that number at more than 100. But whatever the number, if it's 79 or 100, it is still the single biggest death toll for journalists in a conflict zone for years. This surpasses the toll exacted on the press operating in Ukraine in the last 2 years. And of course, we're only at, just over 3 months. By one estimate, 1 out of every 10 journalists in Gaza have already been killed. And one of the most famous journalists in Gaza spoke by video at the rally that was in Washington, D.C. last Saturday, the ceasefire rally for Gaza, Wael al-Dado. He has become a symbol. Wael's family, many of his family members have been killed in the last several weeks. He's become a symbol of the embattled territories, just trauma. While he was reporting early in the stages of the conflict, he's a veteran correspondent for Al Jazeera. He learned that his wife, 2 of his children, and his infant grandchild was killed. And he returned to the job the following day. My understanding is that he also lost a son. But I know that he has lost several members of his family, and he's become, it's kind of become a hero to many in Gaza. I wanted to actually close by reading the report from the 17th, which was yesterday, from the UNRWA Commissioner General. This is Felipe Lazzarini. He was reporting on East Jerusalem and Southern Gaza, and he wrote this yesterday. And I just thought this was a picture to help us understand a little bit of what things are like. Every time I visit Gaza, I witness how people have sunk further into despair. with the struggle for survival consuming every hour. In the south, around Rafah, makeshift structures of plastic sheeting have mushroomed everywhere, including in the streets, with people trying to protect themselves from cold and rain. Each one of these flimsy shelters can home over 20 people. Rafah is so congested that one can barely drive a car amid the sea of people. The population of Rafah has almost quadrupled, with more than 1.2 million people. Every one I have met had a personal story of fear, death, loss, trauma to share. Over the 100 days, the people of Gaza have moved from the sheer shock of losing everything, in some cases, every member of their family, to a debilitating struggle to stay alive and to protect their loved ones. In Deir al-Balah, in the middle areas, I visited one of our schools that turned into a shelter. The overcrowding was claustrophobic. The filthiness was striking. I heard stories of women foregoing food and water to avoid having to use unsanitary toilets. Skin diseases and head lice are rife with those affected stigmatized. People were struggling for food and medicine during the day, feeling cold and damp during the night. They wished to return to their lives before the war, but they realized with deep anxiety that that is unlikely to happen anytime soon. With the scarcity of commercial goods allowed into the strip, the price of basic commodities has increased up to 10 times. From the rarely available fruits and vegetables to baby milk to a used blanket on sale. Mountains of uncollected rubbish fill the streets. The chronically ill do not have sufficient medicine and must learn to live with alternatives or to do without, from basic insulin for diabetes to daily tablets for high blood pressure. People are not able to wash and stay clean. Long and repeated blackouts in telecommunications, including internet and mobile phones, add to the distress as people feel cut off from the rest of the world. The siege is the silent killer of many. There is very little information about the north of the Gaza Strip, as access to that area remains highly restricted. I was not authorized to visit. Our convoys and aid trucks are often delayed for long hours at the checkpoint. Meanwhile, many desperate people now approach our trucks to get food directly off of them without waiting for distribution. By the time the Israeli authorities give our convoys the green light to cross, the trucks are almost empty. Our staff are equally impacted. Despite this, they work tirelessly to support the people around them. I am not able to reassure them that they, let alone their families or UN facilities, will be safe. This has gone on far too long. There are no winners in these wars. There is endless chaos and growing despair. I call again for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire that can bring some respite and enable a much needed and significant increase in the flow of basic supplies, including through the commercial route. Anything short of this will prolong the misery of an entire population. And our call at Churches for Middle East Peace is for a complete and comprehensive ceasefire, that all parties involved in the conflict, from Hezbollah to Iran to Hamas to Israel, that's been bombarding Gaza, that's been punishing the civilian population for the crimes of Hamas, that every violent actor in the conflict would lay down their arms, that all who've experienced trauma would not act out on their trauma on those who are not guilty of causing it, but rather that peaceful means would be pursued, which requires courageous leaders. And so might we pray to that end, might we diligently pursue all means other than violence to bring about peace. So pray to that end, work to that end. Thank you for all who are reaching across divides, seeking to have empathy, seeking to bring comfort to those who are experiencing so much harm and trauma. We continue to pray that hostages would be returned home, that those who are being held in Palestinians who are being held in Israeli prisons without having gone through any type of due process, that they also would be released. There's much, much, much to work toward and to pray for. And so thank you for joining with us in those collective efforts.